I'm Keith, and I'm excited to be here. I'm grateful to all of you for coming and for your wonderful interests and attitudes. It's a great delight for me to be here. So I'll invite a sound of the bell, and in the tradition that where I have learned mindfulness, which is the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Zen master, the bell is a important part of our practice, and it's the bell of mindfulness, inviting us to come home to ourselves, to our breathing, first of all, which brings us in touch with our bodies and our feelings and being in the present moment. So just to share this with you, when to prepare myself to be the bell master, I bow to the bell, and I have a little poem that I say to myself, usually silently, but in this case I'll just share it with you. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness, I send my heart along with the sound of this bell. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and transcend the path of anxiety and sorrow. And then I invite a half sound of the bell, which is to let everyone within hearing range know that a full sound of the bell is coming, and to prepare yourselves to receive the full sound, to sit in a beautiful way or to stand in a beautiful way and receive the full sound. And then you are invited, when you hear it, with your in-breath to say, I listen, I really listen. And with your out-breath to say, silently to yourself, this wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. I listen, I listen. This wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. And then I always leave time for you to enjoy 3 mindful breaths before inviting the bell again or doing anything else. So I'm Keith Mesker, and I've been practicing in Thich Nhat Hanh. We call him Thai. He's known, people who know him call him Thai. And so I've been practicing in Thai's tradition since 2009. And my wife and I were ordained in 2013. So it's just a big part of our lives, and that's where I learned this mindfulness practice. So we're offering this as mindfulness practice, not as Buddhism. And Thai himself has said, the world needs a universal spirituality. We need something that the whole world can come together around. It's not going to be Buddhist. It's not going to be Buddhism. But mindfulness seems to be rather universally appealing. And so I'm happy to use that. And so this is a 6-part series based on his book, The Art of Living, which I highly recommend. And this is the last of the 6 sessions. So we're covering the chapters Letting Go and Nirvana. So you're here at the right time. So in the practice of the 16 breathing practices, which is a meditation that we will do tonight, the 15th of the 16 is letting go. And the title of the chapter is Letting Go, Transformation, and Healing. And the letting go is the final step that allows you to enjoy nirvana. And nirvana is simply, Thay defined it as the world without concepts, or our experience without concepts. And that's the same thing. Our experience in the world that's an important insight. They're the same thing. And so nirvana is simply reality unfettered by our minds, by our thinking. So it's a state of total freedom in which we are without fear, savoring the world. I like the phrase, reality is whole and one. It just communicates to me this possibility for us, is to live knowing, not just as an idea, but as our actual experience, that reality is whole and one. And all the diversity, it doesn't gloss over the diversity. Every being is unique and special. But we're all integral to a whole. And I think enlightenment is to know this. We just get caught up in a mentality that divides the world up, and then we think that the world is actually separate beings, separate pieces. And we simply lose the sense of wholeness. So the intuition of wholeness, to cultivate that, is the point of this practice. It's interesting that the chapter on letting go is all about suffering. It'd been a while since I'd read that part of the book, and so I was surprised by that. But it's very interesting. And it's about letting go of the ways that we create suffering for ourselves, and as a consequence of creating suffering for ourselves, we create suffering for those that we interact with. And for me, in my meditation, I use the 16 breathing practices almost every day in my own meditation. And when I come to letting go, it's just this. It's a very sort of a very physical act of releasing all the tension in my body and my ideas that things should be other than they are, just allow reality to be exactly what it is. And that's nirvana. So, one of the things Thay says is that we want to suffer less. The idea is not to feed suffering. We want to generate well-being, but to do that, we have to acknowledge our suffering. We have to be honest with ourselves. So not resisting, denying, or ignoring, but call the suffering by its true name. Just name it and look deeply into it to see the causes and what's nurturing, what's feeding the suffering. And only then can we cease creating it. Because, I know for myself that 99% of the suffering I experience, I create. I wouldn't say that to starving people in some other situation, but for myself, it's certainly true. We have, in the practice, we have a kind of two special ways of responding to suffering. When we realize we're creating it with our own thinking, then we have a practice called change the CD. And, those tapes that play, that generate suffering, I don't know about you, but I know them well. And it's possible to just play another tape. Instead of worrying about whether the pool is going to overflow in the yard, I could be reminding myself that, I'm the universe. And suddenly it's a very different experience. The other way of responding to our suffering is, sometimes it's just not going to go away. Sometimes the suffering is knocking on the door and it's just not, it's not going to go away. We're going to have to attend to our suffering. And in that case, what we're taught to do is to hold our suffering the way a mother holds her ailing child. Pick it up, and just the picking up relieves some of the suffering. But then the mother continues to look deeply until she realizes what is wrong. Baby needs to be changed or whatever. Mother, this is the energy of mindfulness. This is a beautiful example of what mindfulness is this looking deeply until you understand. And then with that understanding, that compassion, is the ability to relieve the suffering. So, disentangling ourselves from the ways that we create suffering requires courage. For some people, it's their livelihood, and to have the courage to choose a livelihood which they actually feel good about, that's a real struggle. I've had a number of friends who I've just seen throughout their lives just, they felt bad about what they were doing in their jobs. Largely had to do with making bombs and figuring out ways to kill people. And, it paid well, it supported their families, raised their kids. It's very hard to give that up. But, they weren't happy with themselves. And, so there's a place where it takes a lot of courage to change. So I'll read to you a little bit here. Letting go, transformation, and healing. When we know the art of how to suffer, we suffer much less. We're able to make use of the mud of our suffering to grow lotuses of love and understanding. So the suffering has a real value in helping us develop compassion. What we want most in the world is freedom. Our idea of happiness may be the very obstacle standing in the way of our happiness. Letting go. You already have one piece of paper on which you listed all of the conditions of happiness you have. We did that as an earlier exercise. Now you need to take another piece of paper, find somewhere quiet to sit, and make a list of everything that is entangling you, everything you need to let go of, including your ideas about happiness. Just naming what you want to release will make you feel lighter. I can remember, a long, long time ago, I think I was 19 years old, I was very immature person, freshly out on my own in the world, and I was anxious, and there were a whole bunch of things that were just churning around inside of me that, I needed to deal with. And I was just anxious. And so I don't know where I got the idea, but it occurred to me, well, I'm going to itemize all these things, I'm going to write them down. And I came up with a list of 13 things. And at the end of that, I just felt this tremendous relief. All these decades later, I still remember that transformation to well-being that happened just from naming what it was that was bothering me. He's talking about when you live in a city that's polluted and you really want to get away. And a friend finally helps you get away. You begin to feel free as soon as you have left the city behind. You feel the fresh breeze on your face and you see the wide horizon and you feel better right away. This is the joy of letting go. The joy of leaving your entanglements behind. I know that simply acknowledging my suffering leads to relaxing and opening to the whole, which generates joy and happiness. Who is suffering? We think we're a separate self, which is suffering, but we're not. It's not our suffering. We're not suffering alone. It's our whole ancestral lineage that has brought us here that is suffering. And when we encounter our suffering and deal with it and transform it, we transform it for all of our ancestors. You know, this whole lineage of suffering comes to an end when we transform our own suffering. And then that passes on into all of our descendants. So it's a huge role when we have the courage to allow the suffering in us to move through us and to be healed and transformed. When we are able to transform our suffering, we do so not only for ourselves, but also for all our ancestors and descendants. Our body is not our own individual property. It is collective. It is the body of our ancestors. In our body, we have our mother and father, our nation, our people, our culture, and the whole cosmos. If we are overwhelmed by despair, we may think of destroying our body. But the insight of inner being shows us that destroying our body would be killing our father, our mother, and our ancestors in us. It is possible to let this suffering, which is not ours alone, pass through the body. It is impermanent. Bit by bit, with fearlessness and perseverance, it can be transformed. So the practice in our tradition is that when something comes up, it's an energy, and then we invite another energy called the energy of mindfulness to come up and meet this energy. And if it's suffering, it will calm it down. And if it is something wonderful like a sunset, it will just enhance it. So mindfulness has this great power. Embracing our pain and suffering is an art. It may take some training to learn how to do it. As a meditator, you are an artist, and the art of embracing your suffering is particular to you. You can be creative in how you handle a painful feeling. You may want to draw, paint, listen to inspiring music, or write a poem. Some of my poems that have the most beautiful images were written during the times when I was encountering my greatest suffering. Writing these poems was a way to nourish and comfort myself, so I would not lose my balance, and so I would have the strength to continue my work. When I am experiencing a different feeling, I often choose to bring to mind a positive memory to comfort me and water the seeds of hope in my consciousness. It may be the memory of my favorite cedar trees in Plum Village, or the image of a young child laughing and playing with delight. This is a way to garden the mind. The positive energy of good seeds gladdens the mind and embraces and penetrates the painful feeling. What would be the positive memories or experiences you could call upon to help embrace the energy of sorrow or despair when it comes up? So the practice is to calm down, to embrace our suffering with compassion. Don't run away. Allow mindfulness, concentration, and insight to manifest. Don't make it worse. Don't exaggerate it. Don't get caught up with regrets, anger, blame, worry. And we do that all the time. You know, we turn a mountain into a molehill into a mountain, and then identify the roots. They may be ancestral, and this understanding brings about transformation. And then we have to see what is feeding the suffering. Nothing exists without nourishment. As we start to change our habits of thinking, speaking, behaving, and consuming, we cut off and uproot these sources of food, and our suffering will steadily begin to die. As it dies, it becomes compost, nourishing new flowers of understanding and compassion in the garden of our heart. Nirvana is now. Mindfulness, concentration, and insight transforms our suffering and brings us to nirvana. Nirvana comes from the dialect that the Buddha spoke in Nepal, India, and it refers to ashes, and it's when in the morning it's probably the woman of the house, but whoever it is goes down to make breakfast, and feels the fire, the ashes of the fire, and if it's hot, you just put in a few twigs and bring it back to life. But if it's completely out, then you can run your hands into the ashes. You can just imagine the soft, cool feeling. And that cool feeling is nirvana. That's where the word comes from. So the metaphor of that is this is how we are when we're free of afflictions. The fires of affliction are out, and we enjoy the coolness of nirvana. So it's not something you have to die for, You don't have to wait. We can do this right now, and we should. And suffering and nirvana go together, because we know what nirvana is because we remove the afflictions, and then we feel this wonderful relief. And so we have a saying, no mud, no lotus. And we need our bodies. We need our feelings and our perceptions and our mental formations and our consciousness in order to experience nirvana. We have to be alive as we are to experience nirvana. So we touch our cosmic body, which is the world of phenomena, and we call it in Buddhism it gets referred to as the historical dimension. But it just means the world that we're all used to, time and space and movement. And we need to touch our cosmic body deeply in order to touch the ultimate dimension. When we see the world of phenomena from the perspective of the ultimate, we see that if there were no death, there could not be birth. If there were no suffering, there could not be happiness. Without mud, there could be no lotus. They depend on each other to manifest. Birth and death are just ideas at the level of the historical dimension. They are not the true nature of reality in the ultimate dimension, which transcends all ideas and notions, all signs and appearances. In the ultimate dimension of reality in itself, there is no birth and no death, no suffering and no happiness, no coming and no going, no good and no evil. When we can let go of all ideas and notions, including the idea of a self, a human being, a living being, or a lifespan, we touch the true nature of reality in itself. We touch nirvana. Nirvana is the ultimate dimension. It is the extinction and letting go of all notions and ideas. The concentrations on emptiness, signlessness, aimlessness, impermanence, non-craving, and letting go all help us get a breakthrough into the nature of reality. By contemplating deeply our physical body and the realm of phenomena, we get in touch with nirvana, the true nature of the cosmos, our God body, and we experience peace, happiness, freedom, and non-fear. We are no longer afraid of birth and death, being and non-being. Just as birds enjoy soaring in the sky, and deer enjoy roaming in the woods, so do the wise ones enjoy dwelling in nirvana. We don't have to look very far to find nirvana, because it is our true nature in this very moment. You cannot remove the ultimate from yourself. To touch nirvana is to realize the insight of no birth and no death in our daily life. I went to Plum Village, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's retreat center in France, the monastery in France where he has lived for most of his life. And our tradition is called the Plum Village tradition because that's where he has been. And so I went there for a 21-day retreat. It's like the big retreat that happens every other year for the kind of the serious students around the world, and the Dharma teachers come, and for the lay community, this is the big event. And so I went there, and I met the most senior monk at Deer Park at that time was Kai Li, this delightful Malaysian, twinkly-eyed monk. And since he was the most senior monk there, even though he came from another tradition, but he'd been a monk the longest, so that qualified him. So he had a lot of one-on-one experiences with Thich Nhat Hanh, which, you know, the rest of us haven't had. So I got to hear some stories, and one of them was he was having this meeting with Thai. I think they were sitting on Thai's veranda, and Thai asked him, "Do you have a question for me?" And he says, "Yes. What is enlightenment?" And Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Do you know what your suffering is?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "That's your enlightenment." So there's actually a little conclusion here called Time to Live. In addition to the 2 chapters that we're covering tonight, Time to Live. The 7 concentrations, these are what we've covered so far in this series. The 7 concentrations on emptiness, signlessness, aimlessness, impermanence, non-craving, letting go, and nirvana are very practical. As we apply them in our daily life, we experience increasing freedom from fear, anxiety, anger, and despair. The insight of interbeing and interdependence helps us enjoy the present moment more fully, recognizing the vastness of our being and cherishing all our different bodies. We are able to live true to ourselves, reconcile with our loved ones, and transform our difficulties and suffering. With the insight of these concentrations, our life begins to acquire a deeper quality. There is more joy, peace, and compassion in whatever we do. We realize that we don't have to wait to go to heaven or nirvana to be happy. We can touch heaven and nirvana right here on earth. When we touch reality deeply in the present moment, we touch eternity. We always stop for bells. We transcend birth and death, being and non-being, coming and going. We master the art of living, and we know we're not wasting our life. We don't just want to live, we want to live well. The immediate product of your practice of mindfulness is joy, solidity, and happiness in every moment. Suppose you are walking mindfully from the parking lot to your office. Every step is peace. Every step is freedom. Every step is healing. Arriving at your office is only a byproduct. By learning to walk in freedom like that, you develop the habit of dwelling happily in the present moment. The freedom and happiness of the walking enters every cell of your body. If you can do this every day, then walking mindfully will become a way of life, an art of living that you can transmit to your children. Scientists tell us that to live is to learn. For millions of years, our species has been learning. We have been learning to adapt to our environment. We have been learning in order to survive. With natural selection, those who can't adapt don't survive. If we want to survive in our fast-paced society that is overwhelmed by stress, anxiety, fear, and despair, we have to learn how to deal with it. And what we learn becomes part of our genetic and spiritual heritage that we transmit to future generations. The heritage is in our cells and in our collective consciousness. And so he talks about how we're evolving. The whole cosmos is evolving, and we're part of this evolution of everything. And so hopefully what we're evolving to from, he talks about Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and now we're Homo sapiens, and hopefully the next phase is Homo conscious. Mindful, concentrated, insightful, compassionate, joyful, happy, loving human beings. So that's one option, one response to our troubled world. And the other option is just to, try to be number one in it. And that's probably much less pleasant. Stress is the way of that mode of living. Plus, it's also unmindful living, and the result is that we're destroying our planet. That's what I really care about, ultimately, is the earth. It's not just our home. I mean, it is our home, but it's ourselves. It's our larger self, this beautiful planet. This is the only place in the universe. We've been looking and looking and looking. We haven't found life anywhere else in the universe. This precious blue ball floating, soaring around the sun is our, it's the greatest gift that there is, and it's so beautiful, and it's just so amazing, the beauty of the earth, the Amazon rainforest, the coral reefs, the oceans, the mountains, the streams, all of the living, the forests, and all the plants and all the animals and us, it's this paradise, and it's withering. So that's our moment, And this is so what we're doing is we're transforming ourselves so that we can be a part of the transformation of humankind and transform humanity's relationship to the greater whole of which we are a part, the whole earth community. That's what motivates me to want to do this work and this teaching, and to do my part while I'm here to try and heal the earth. And we're the part of the earth that needs to wake up and transform. Do you have time to enjoy the glorious sunrise? Do you have time to enjoy the music of the falling rain? The birds singing in the trees? Or the gentle sound of the rising tide? We need to wake up from a long dream. It is possible to live differently. Can you see that you already want to live differently? Time is not money. Time is life, and time is love. Thank you for listening.